Hello and most welcome to 1004. I am presently at the local church in the backyard. I will do a lecture about how we try to solve things. There will be a short break also in this seminar because I'm awaiting a call. I will address the dissolution in modern times. We feel an absence, and we are also seeing the effects of not being able to making good decisions, and knowledge is not informing our decisions. The last interview I heard just now from Ian McKilcrew suggests those things. There have been an IQ drop of 14 points since the 1930s, and that is quite amazing. And one of the tests they do is the reaction time. And reaction time is very important when it comes to thinking. Slow reaction equals low intelligence. And it seemed that those figures could even be greater, because since the 1980s, education has been sort of inclined to teaching the ability to solve IQ tests among the students. And that is cheat. That makes it impossible to truly study the effects. And that means, although they've been cheating, the IQ drop is still a staggering 14 points. It got so far that the Electrical Association in the United States has put an alarm. The skill levels are now so low among electricians that they feel there is a danger for the general public. And of course, also our health, our sanctitude, our ability to feel calm, safe, happy, not letting bothersome thinking destroying our day and so forth. We do feel an absence and an emptiness, this very typical boredom that starts in the late 18th century and after that becomes more and more prevalent, and at the end of the 19th century it ends squarely with a depression. And this is the case now. The lack of intelligence, the lack of decision making, all those skills are not trained anymore, and we do something. We want to fill the gap. And we try all sorts of things. Psychotherapy, Feldenkrais method, sacrocranial method, cognitive behavior therapy, which is incredibly common today. Swedish government in the early 2000s spent the sum of 25 billion Swedish crown on that. It turned out, after the investigation, to have achieved nothing. Yes, zero. And this is not something I think is unique for cognitive behavior therapy. And then we have hypnotherapy, try balancing, we try stretching, we go to the gym, we take Tai Chi classes and so forth. And today mindfulness is constantly something that there is a call for. Do mindfulness and you'll be happy. And I would say the problem is looking too late and too far away. We learn through the episodes we have, thousands, that something was already always established, long before we even start to feel any pain or ails. And long before we as individuals had any feeling that something was missing. Heck, we grew up this way. How could we feel a missing that always been there? It's like being blind from birth. It's impossible to have a lack. But I would say there still is a lack. And it shows itself in the pains and in the ailments. And it shows itself for this incredible famine for life. We want life. We don't have it, but we want it. We want that once more blood will pour through our veins, and that we will feel alive, and that we will be able to make firm and fast decisions that are well informed, that are not happenstance. We talked a bit yesterday about today. It's proven when you do a planning, it's better to throw dice or go to something called intuition. That would be much better than that you actually think. Your thinking process is in such a bad shape. And I think one of those things that deconstruction goes deeply in, and it's harder to accept, it's the idea that we can form the thoughts we want. Deconstruction and the private language argument clearly shows that to be complete nonsense. How just because something is inner, or I call it inner, how could I have control over it? It is complete ludicrous. It's sheer nonsense. But it's very hard to accept. And I think that was the last thing for me to be able to accept within the language problem. Private language argument. I thought in the beginning it was just the language I used outwards. But of course, thinking is language, and that means I can't control my own thinking. I can't have my own meaning. I can't construct my own thinking. I need to share that, and that's a skill. So the sanity or the complexity of my own thinking is dependent on how much exogenous I go. The less exogenous I go, the less understandable I will be to myself. And maybe if I make myself too right and only go to the endogenous, I will end up an autistic, not taking in anything from the outside anymore, and being self-content, and thereby not being able to make good quality thinking. And I think it's a tough myth to beat. We all think, oh, I can control my own thinking, and I had often those hands raised when I had lecture about quantum physics, and they said, well, that means I can conjure whatever I want. Quantum physics says that you can create whatever you want. Well, the thing is, what we have least control of is our inner life, without a doubt. And that's been proven way too many times. So the question is completely ludicrous. And I would say it would be a much, much bigger miracle for you to be able to create your own thinking and control them. I don't say it's impossible. I think it's possible with chaos theory. But it would be a much greater achievement than constructing your own intellectual thought in your head, conjuring it. And actually, I want to add to that, the satisfaction of being able to control your own thoughts would make the construction of a multi-billion ferry nothing in comparison. Nothing. This is the modern ailment without comparison. And we start looking. But there is a real problem lying before everything, and that's the ontic take. That's the amnesia. And actually the pain, the ailments, the lack of balance, the misuse are just symptoms of a much greater problem, and that is that of the ontic take. And if you don't go back and look at that, I don't see how anything can sort of be solved. We need to look before, and we are able to do that. This is thanks to quantum mechanics, because none of the philosophers in the millennia before, or thinkers or writers, nor inventors, nor geniuses, nor fathers of religion, nor Augustinus, nor revolutionaries, no anti-people, no pro-people, have pointed to the amnesia. No one. Not a singular individual before quantum mechanics. This is the first thing. This is the number one. And it's also the number one in my lecture. Number two is that when we feel the awareness of life, when it turns up, usually in the 20s or the 30s, we feel that we have problems and we need to fix them. We feel that we need to fix our soul. Just like you go to a mechanic to fix your broken car, or to the shoemaker to fix your worn-out soul. In that manner, you go to a professional to fix your worn-out soul. Pun intended. This I call the technological solution. We vaguely copy what we think is a technological solution without really going into the complexities. And then we say, I leave my soul to the analyst or the therapist. He or she will fix my soul. And this is a fix-up, like making a makeover or changing your clothes or having a new car or mending the car or fixing your plumbing. Will fix the soul. Leave the soul by the psychiatrist. We give some medication to the soul, just like putting oil into a cumbersome joint. You can put the oil, the holy oil of the psychiatrist, into your soul, and that will fix it. That will make it possible for you to believe more, to understand more, be able to plan and all that. You just need a quick fix somehow. I don't think that's a good solution. And I would go even further to say, if it was a solution, that would be even more horrible. But obviously it's not a solution. It doesn't address the main problem. And it's not a problem of regular basis. It's not a problem per se. Actually, it's more something to be understood. And I would say that the pain and the weariness, tiredness, depression, lack of direction are only symptoms, and they are there to help you turning back to where it all started, before your own birth, in the establishment of the amnesia. And obviously, and I think that's obvious now after 1,000 lectures, there is no why in modern culture. And it's slowly disappearing. I think intelligence is a direction to do with time, space and knowledge. And it's indicated by this big research by Ian McGilchrist and et al. Swiftness is one trait of the whole thing. And I would say localization. And very few today are able to localize properly and good. So see the awareness and the pain as something extremely good. They are symptoms, so you can go back to fix the real problem, the real ail. And once you understand, you will be so relieved. And that goes even for before you were, so to speak, born, or you were very young. Even if you were to understand it then, you would have felt a great relief. But of course you couldn't, you were too little. little to understand, not having the same broadness in intelligence. And it also clearly shows that we seem to be thinking that the soul is something you can take out of the system somehow. You can put it in the washing machine and leave it to dry. The weariness is knocking on your shoulder and tells you that the system will break down and that it was not sound from the beginning, although it feels normal, natural and healthy. It's not a strong, chaotic system. And maybe, with different reasons in modern society, especially the metaphor of technology, the crude, sloppy idea without really doing technology, we have technological solutions and technological thinking. That makes things worse, but we should be thankful it made things worse, because that makes us in modern time having the intention, the want to go back. If we were to live happy all our days, in comfort, in this das Man, as Heidegger calls it, we will be ignorant of it, about this inertia, and that would be a great shame. Now when we have the opportunity, now when quantum mechanics is discovered and cannot be undiscovered, it's out there. We cannot get rid of it, even if we wanted, with all our system and all our might. Wouldn't matter. It's out there. Of course, you can still go to the psychotherapist and try that out for a couple of months or years, and you will learn how to cope. You learn how to smile even if you don't feel any happiness. Learn to convince yourself everything is working well. It learns you to ignore your symptoms, to bury them deep, deep within yourself. It's a horrific thing, but it's not really made by malintent. It's lack of knowing. It's the fear in us of understanding that the world actually have rules. In lack of rules, in lack of properties, in lack of complexities, we think we can make up our own knowledge. We can construct our own philosophies. And those philosophies will still be good somehow, without touching the world. They will be good in an ontic way. But they will only be understandable for yourself, and maybe not even yourself. And they will only convince people who are already convinced. Might change the language, but we went into the language change before. That's the most typical trait of academia, the name changing. Changing polarities, giving new names to things that had names before, to make them less understandable or sharper, or creating shallow polarities that doesn't really have an effect in the world. I was talking to Henry earlier about Adolf Hitler. I think he should be compared to Benito Mussolini. People were actually literally laughing at him. He was too bombastic, he was too self-assured, he was too screamy, he was just too annoying. That's a real effect. And especially if you don't know Italian. But imagine you're an Italian linguist, like I used to be, and study his words. You can sort of represent his word and say they have that this or that meaning, and make up the whole figment of your fantasy that sort of fits that. But I would say he was mainly ineffectual. Just the very thing that He didn't even manage to invade Greece. How that is even possible. A superpower at that time, with colonials all over the world, a big fleet. Well, it sure as hell wasn't technology missing the Italians. It was thinking power, it was stamina, direction. The Germans had to come in and help them. So true conviction is not the same as superficial conviction, and it's, I think, one of the reasons one build up these easier complexities is because you simply can't do any more complexities. It's not within your scope. And obviously Benito Mussolini wasn't a smart person. Otherwise he would have won. I think the purpose of all these cures and potions, I even heard somebody told me that there is a potion against bad memory. That memory sort of can be separated from the organism, and that memory also was completely passive. And like a piece of machinery, add this liquid or pills, I don't know what it was, and memory miraculously will be better. That will never ever happen, and it has never happened in history. It doesn't work that way. It's the very activity of our thinking processes that makes things that we usually describe as being memory. It is actually a very active process, and it's incredibly different on level between person to person. Some persons are absolutely excellent at memorizing, or do retention, as I would call it. It can be trained in 20% of the cases, but in most cases it cannot, and I would say the amnesia is caused by that. Until you give up amnesia, because as long as you have this idea of memory being photographic takes of instances of moments and then stored in a big library like university library, the UB, and down in 7 floors, and then you need to make a request for that memory, fill in a form as we used to have to do, I remember that, roll it up, put it in the little cylinder, and into the pneumatic system it goes down to the 5th floor where it's stored. And there was these people on rollerblades, actually. I don't know if you know that. So they sort of skated the corridors, took the book, retrieved it, and put it in an elevator going for the reception. And there in the elevator, he was giving a copy of the ordering form and put in alphabetical order on the shelf. Our memory doesn't work anything like that. And the idea it worked that way is well established with psychology, psychiatry, all these different strands I mentioned, and this metaphor, this idea causes havoc because you really need to know how it actually works. Somehow, usually when it comes to the mental functions, we say it doesn't matter really how it works. So we are using the technological model. And for instance, a car, it's very important where you put in the oil. Put it on the seat, it doesn't do any good. It needs to be in a specific point of the motor. You need to put up a plug and all that. It's much more complex when it comes to the mind. You cannot generally say train your head or train your memory. It's exact. And I think in this idea of a polarization and a difference between body and mind, we sort of devalue mind. And one of those ideas is what I mentioned before. We think we can control the mind, which is absolute nonsense. We think we can control our own thoughts. that we sort of can think positive things of people just because we want it, or negative things because we want it, or that those things could be helpful in our endeavors. No, it's because of skill. And no one's thoughts seems the same in different people. When testing intelligence within a 10-year period, there is a prophecy. Things like fastness and movement would be used instead of written tests. Those will decipher intelligence much more to the exactness that is needed today. And then all the ideas of representation will be gone. It will be a test, and it is very similar to jumping a fence or running fast. It can be objectively tested. Speed is one of those traits. I bet you there are going to be much more traits coming up. And I bet you also they will miss out on a lot of those traits that are too covered, they are too down in the system. But some superficial way we can get a grasp of intelligence. This memory process even have a name in psychiatry, which is absolutely ridiculous. It's called the executive function. And it's supposed to work without human interference. Be a part of a brain you can sort of take out like a plug and put in back. And it could be said to be broken, it could be said to be fixed. Although those things are accurate to a certain point, they are fundamentally nonsense. No brain in this world works that way. Movement is in the bottom. I don't know how this extremely silly idea of memories like photo images and stored in a big storage room could even come up. But that goes to show the metaphors we choose are never thought of. They are never ever intentionally pondered or seen, analyzed. We don't look at them. We just passively absorb them. And you are bound to have a million of those passively absorbed ideas. It had nothing to do with you, and you never intended them to be there, but they are blocking the ways of learning. They are blocking the ways of knowing. They are blocking loads of things. One of those things, and here is the third thing, a thing that works. We have a thing that works. It's been even taught in East Asia. But it's not part of common knowledge because it was never taken away from the childhood of those people. And that they could actually be real things of the world to know, real complexities, real knowledge, not this devalued representation that could be knowledge, the knowledge taken by Socrates. No, real knowledge, real traits we need to know about our own mind, ways that we should go around, orders we should keep, things we shouldn't do, and so forth. And to a Westerner this sounds completely ridiculous. For us Westerners, the mind is just some moldable no entity with no characteristics whatsoever. Actually, we think that all text, all discourse doesn't have a structure to it, not something that we could learn, no direction in it. But as you progress, you will learn more and more to see the direction, or the lack of it, or the amount of it, or the height of it, whatever we call. This is called ki in Japanese, and it has nothing to do with energy. It has more to do with what they use instead of representation, or where representation doesn't do its job, because it never does its job. One way of explaining prana or ki or chi, or the similar, is to say that's the exact meeting point of the strength of the exogenous directed endogenous force meeting the other thing, and how complex and directed you are able to structure your own take, your projection. That is the key. And then you get more knowledge back than other people who have lower keys. Therefore, key varies from person to person, but it also varies in you. From the midday to the afternoon to the night, in the early morning, in the midnight, and so forth. Key is your ability to make strong projections. It's never anything to do with energy. That is a 19th century take, and it obscures much more than it clears. And maybe that's one of the reasons key never been understood in the Western Hemisphere. It sure as hell did not help me studying Japanese, trying to learn those expressions. They are very common in Japanese language, and not knowing them means you make huge mistakes. And energy, well, I can give you an example. Ki ga mijikai, for instance, ki is short. I thought that meant little energy or something like that. It means that you're short-tempered. Obviously, I understand now. But I think this idea of technology has influenced too much, and they have a tendency to draw in the spectre of Newton, so to speak, to use a Derridian analogy. The Derridian analogy would be the spectre of Newton comes in once more with full force, because we let those metaphors coming from Newton, without thinking, without choosing, we let them fly into our understanding of other cultures. And that does do a lot of damage. That's true damage. And this is what Ian McGilchrist is so good, and why he's so important, because before that I could just say this thing without any scientific proof, but because he drew together the biggest scientific research unit ever to be constructed with subjects, neurology, psychology, science of cognition, and so forth. That makes enough basis for me to stand here and to say those things with confidence. I do not need to scream them out because of my lack of confidence in them. This is truly what is going on. The human mind is much more complex than we think, and there are rules to be obeyed. There are areas to be sort of mapped, and there already, already our tradition has shown us different things, and today we ignore those things, and in other cultures there could be even more. Not having a word from Ki Prana shows that we have a other standpoint. We have something added in our experience of reality, because similar things to Ki and Prana are also existence within the Navajo Indians in their really language, because all words in the Navajo language are to construct things. They are never ontic. The ontic mood is not present, and there's a good reason for that. It's not a natural mood in the cosmos. It's a stopping point, and it can only be functioning if we get it at an early age. And I would say it has to get to us almost always before we sort of verbalize. Maybe a perceptive person could sort of acquire it later. That person is really sensitive, have his perception out, it's antenna, he can sort of suck it up. I think there are those cases, and I do have a specific case in mind, but I won't mention that today because that would be sort of taking away the subject a little bit too far from where I want to go. Where I want to go is this incredibly important differentiation within the body and thinking. That is between dorsal and ventral. That is something that is fundamental to all Eastern thinking, and it's specifically expounded in the Qi tradition in China. There is always drawings with the exact same division, because that division is natural to our human bodies. It needs to be observed, and it shouldn't be taken from the body map, as Couples-Blakesley showed to be the case. We go with the body map, there is an imitation of a static thing, usually this body of Leonardo da Vinci or something similar, and we think our bodies are this static, although moving thing. But ventral and dorsal bring back the elasticity and the polarity of the body that makes it have a key. And that goes for thinking as well. There is no absolute difference here. You will find in your thinking, if you train hard, start with the body. Always start with the exogenous. Never go into the more difficult and more rule-obeying area of the mind. Start with exogenous. Establish well within yourself or out with yourself the dorsal areas, how they go, how they divide the body. See them in front of you, and see them when applied to your own body when you do things like bending down, getting up out chairs. The more you do that, the more you will just stabilize your system until you come to that balance, when you're enough balanced to actually enter your own inner domain. But don't go inside directly. All the prejudice I had would have made it dangerous even to go inside, because that complexity I have no way of dealing with, and it needs to be trained. But then you will also experience a sort of a dorsal end to words and sentences and a ventral part. And one take on that could be the ventral part is where the meaning is standing, so to speak. And the dorsal is the airier, the freer, the more sort of opening up part. So then you can call the darker areas the more explicit, the more firmly detailed, whereas the implicit is more of the lighter color, the white color, as John Appleton uses. But dorsal ventral is definitely a part of thinking. But establish these things, because you never tried in learning things that won't bend to your own will. The Western take on mind is I can control my mind to 100%. Who says that? And then that you have absolute insight to your own mind, and you have all the knowledge of your own mind. All those things are completely absurd. There is at least a gazillion more knowledge to be had from the inner workings of your head. And many of those things are actually shared with other people. They have to, because we share language. And language is the directing force in our body/mind. It is something public. In a way, key is always used in a public way, not going into your own middle of your own body. It's not a body helping system, Reiki or similar things, with a heavy emphasis on inner or anything like that. No, it's public. It's public like language, and it's based on use. And it can not be done only in privacy. But once you get skilled, skill doesn't exist in the West when it comes to the mind. Nobody trained the mind for centuries here. Used to be a training thing, very important. Titian said, no man should rule any country without training of the mind. That is painting. So this needs to be fairly well established, otherwise we can't do thinking. So don't imagine thinking is something easy and something that just can be somehow conjured at Fiat. You need to train this. And the way of going about getting a direction is seeing the division. Before that, it can't be the healthy polarity that our body needs to be well projected. It will be a chaotic system in a lower region. But once you add this complexity, and these are absolutely necessary complexities, once you do that in every thinking, in every attitude, in every understanding, you will be more able to reach into those areas. But that needs to be trained. And I think one of the reasons we don't train this is we imagine nothing to do any difference. We imagine it's just like psychotherapy or different things. We are delusioned and defeatist. And there is a very good reason to be that. Why should I do this? Why should I think this? Absolute good right to say that. But this is founded in chaotic theory. And all systems in the world are in the end chaotic systems. And this is used by all Eastern nations, since they are obviously using their words to greater detail, to greater skill, and are able to actually mean what they say. There is a huge difference. Whereas our words, by not being in the world, in the language game, they lose their force. Representational words are maybe not words at all. They don't carry knowledge, and they are utterly not understandable by anyone else, not even the person himself. And that makes for a huge lot of problemity. This is very problematic from the very start. It doesn't get any less problematic if you think it's not confused, not complex. You strengthen your whole system by this, and you can reach a language where you become understandable to yourself. You'll be able to project your thinking in the way you want, and you can start to think, analyze, intellectualize in a sharp way, not the academic way, not the idea of the representation or ontic or existent and all that, things that simply do not work. They don't have any influence on the world or the happening, because they were never constructed with a why, with a direction. What can they do? No, never. Academia is passivity. Academia is giving up somewhere. Of course, there's a good reason. The amnesia is something affected the whole Western culture. But it is not the reason to give up completely. Although all our helping methods are based on an understanding that was made before quantum mechanics, bar no one. And I have two good examples I'm going to finish off with there. Both Gary Zuka, which I met in 1997, and Fritjof Capra, which I never met, none of these had any understanding of this. What they're proposing is just some postmodern view of the modern society and a very simple, non-complex negation of everything. That doesn't help anything. None of those books written by Gary Zukav nor Fritjof Capra could have any use whatsoever, without maybe for creativity. They could be used by this lecture series to create new ideas, because they are good at creating ideas, but as directions and as knowledge, they do not serve any purpose. And this is the reason they did not themselves firmly understand that there was an amnesia, an ontic take of reality, lying in the background of all of Western society. Unspoken, unpointed, not understood, not verbalized, never. And that is very important, and this makes this method absolutely unique. It's made after quantum mechanics, inspired by the working science of chaos theory and quantum mechanics. Do actually cover both body and mind, not only mechanical devices like bridges, which is fine. And as an engineer, I'm a bit insulted that people copy classical physics for their own purposes in a clumsy, hayward way. I say thank you very much and have a very pleasant afternoon.